The Existential Craftsman. From time immemorial, people have contemplated the nature of being, and likewise the concept of origins, or the coming into existence. Such contemplations have often coalesced into the core structure of religious systems of belief, and correspondingly within the branch of philosophy known as ontology, the study of essence. Existentialism is a relatively recent focus within ontology that centers around the human individual's concept of being and becoming. Prevalent themes are authenticity and individual creation of meaning, themes that find resonance within traditional craftsmanship. Craftsmen are typically concerned with the authenticity of their creations, whether or not the crafted objects truly retain the expression of their will as an artifact of their touch. Similarly, there exists a trepidation that their work might be viewed as inauthentic, or worse still, meaningless. I would like to consider if there is any potential for intrinsic meaning in craft, how craftsmen use symbolic meaning, and a particularly modern dilemma threatening craft, the absurd. Intrinsic meaning. Let's begin by an illustration of a flower. What does it mean? Well, it doesn't mean anything, it just is, one might reasonably reply. A flower certainly doesn't mean something else. It doesn't refer to anything. However, I wouldn't hastily conclude that a flower is meaningless. Perhaps we could consider whether a flower has inherent meaning, or stated another way, the flower is its own meaning. As humans, we're well adapted to this qualitative, inherent meaning of the natural world. A flower will elicit sensual responses of sight, smell, feel, and sometimes even taste, with or without further hallucinogenic effect. In this way, flowers are intuitively sensible to human beings, even by very young children. Contrast this naive, direct, visceral sensibility with the literal meaning of a flower as defined by the American Heritage Dictionary. The reproductive structure of angiosperms, characteristically having either specialized male or female organs, or both male and female organs, such as stamens and a pistil, enclosed in an outer envelope of petals and sepals. So the literal meaning of flower becomes quite complicated and contingent on other literal meanings, whilst our direct experience of a flower remains simple and accessible. Would a botanical, that is to say, scientific analysis of a flower, reveal further or perhaps deeper meaning? We've been at the classification of flowers in general in particular for some centuries now, with infinitely greater means of dissection from the cellular to the DNA to the now subatomic level, with promising theories to take us even further. So it is that a single flower is now classified amongst the most complex things in the universe, composed of levels of complexity ad infinitum. We lament the complexity of the material world, losing sight of the fact that we're the ones who keep cutting it to pieces. Flowers are simple, yet rich in meaning. However, ascribing meaning to them in artificial, closed, conventional systems of literal and scientific terms has made them unintelligible to the point of absurdity. How does one ever feel at home in a world like that? Last summer, I had opportunity to work on a project of traditional masonry in the small village of Hundesberg, Germany. What do traditional handcrafted villages like this and others mean? They don't refer to anything outside of themselves, yet you just feel the village itself is rich in meaning. It's authentic. What is physically embodied in my Hundesberg example is successive generations of human intention and attention, humans being humane. The oaks of the timber framing from adjacent fields cleared for cultivation, the stone from the local quarry, now the summer swimming hole, the bricks and terracotta tiles from a clay deposit up on the hill. Crafting a community with our neighbors from materials readily available around us is an eminently human activity. Nothing absurd about it. Symbolic meaning. There is, of course, meaning that refers to something outside of itself. In fact, this is how the term meaning is most often used and understood. One way for a craftsman to express symbolic meaning is with ornament, alternatively called enrichment. There are a number of methods for achieving this: carving, scratching, molding, and painting, to name just a few. We appreciate that artistic representation is only a symbol, a reference of something else. Ornament's power lies in human sympathy. The craftsman draws upon the fractal attributes of, say, a flower, to select a handful of attributes, the essence of the thing to convey in the selected medium. And so when you look upon the ornament, you get it. Otherwise stated, you sympathize with the process. If we have familiarity with the medium, we might even begin to imagine ourselves doing the carving, painting, or what have you. Likely, it heightens our appreciation for the craftsman's imagination and skill. Yet, just having fulfilled human beings, as embodied in the example of the craftsman, are of tremendous benefit to a community. Furthermore, when these investments in intrinsic and symbolic meaning are made in the shared public realm, in a church, a high street, a piazza, etc., as they customarily were, then an inheritance is established for everyone, an enriched community that loves itself, that feels at home. The absurd. The kind of life that established traditional villages around the world, many of which still remain for our enjoyment, seem like an impossibility today, a utopian fantasy. What is the absurd? How has meaning been undermined by civilized society? Coercion. In its most virulent forms, we find enslavement and serfdom. Great works of beauty like the Parthenon celebrate idealized human perfection, overlooking a city that was the birthplace of democracy. And yet, much of this was built on a foundation of war, misery, and exploitation. There is an unresolved tension between the rich symbolic meaning of many such cities and monuments of antiquity and the inhumane treatment, the destruction of the intrinsic meaning and worth of the individual. The skilled craftsman reduced to a tool himself to express the will of monsters. Dishonesty. Nothing corrupts meaning like a lie. The McMansion puts its dishonesty on display like a proud peacock. It pretends to use local traditional materials, yet all materials are industrial from a factory far away. It pretends to be finely crafted, yet it extracts the cheapest labor from the most vulnerable in society. It promises you health and status. It delivers toxicity, debt, and mediocrity. Subversion. A very visible manifestation of subversion is irony, typical of so-called postmodernism. Often a form is taken as an exemplar of tradition and handcrafted refinement. The proportions are changed, the function inverted, traditional materials and methods are replaced with the latest in construction tech. To its credit, postmodernism doesn't lie. Rather, it ridicules intrinsic meaning as an impossible joke. Existentialism has been interpreted by some as an individualistic philosophy, described as isolating or inward-looking. However, I would contend that being an individual has no meaning independent of others any more than individuality is possible without the air you breathe. It is modern civilization that is isolating, with its increasing manifestations of coercion, dishonesty, and subversion. The absurd. Two main tenets of existentialism that I did not develop here were that the individual is free and is responsible. This is very empowering. We can choose to reject absurdity, instead embracing lives of intrinsic and symbolic meaning. Perhaps it is in this time of crisis for humanity that our living a life of individual meaning can have the greatest impact on intrinsic meaning for human society at large.